if you really think about it, you can understand the resentment that has been created by a system that has rewarded the people at the top as opposed to the people who feel like maybe they have been productive and done everything right, and they've fallen so far behind. There's this resentment towards the wealthy, and there's really a growing chasm and friction between labor and capital. And it's going to be exacerbated, I think, by the acceleration of artificial intelligence and robotics, which is going to put downward pressure on, on the employment market. How do you see these forces kind of coexisting and not resulting in a total revolution?
I just want to help frame some of this, because one of the biggest confusions that I see when I talk to people about any of this stuff is truly the definition of inflation and deflation. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example that kind of illustrates the difference between this terminology, because both of these things are happening, but depending on like how you correctly define it, and it answers your question that you just asked, Natalie. So I recently did a show where I was talking to this expert on Tesla and these robo taxis that Elon Musk has running in Austin, and I think he's running them in San Francisco or Silicon Valley or something like that they're finally testing these things out. The reduction in cost compared to Uber is about 80% a reduction. So if you would take, let's say I took a Uber to the airport right now, and let's say it was $20. With a robo taxi, it's going to be like $4. Okay. So when you think about this word deflation, what we're talking about is tech deflation. That enhancement in AI, the robotics, the cost to manufacture these cars, the fact that no human needs to be in the car driving it, is why the price is going from 20 to 4. Okay. The impact that has on society, I think the number of Uber drivers, hold on here. I looked up this number and then I forgot it. I think it's 7 or 8 million, 8.8 million people today drive for Uber.
Wow.
Worldwide or US? Worldwide?
Worldwide.
Yeah.
Worldwide. 8.8 million people drive for Uber. Do you really think Uber can compete in this space when this starts to go at scale, call it 5-10 years from now? And pretty much these are the who you can't compete with Waymo. I mean, those cars look like they cost $200,000 with all the sensors and everything. There's no way they're going to compete, right? I read that these robo-taxi cars, he's able to build these cars at like $10,000 or $20,000 cheaper than the retail cars that he's selling. If you go out and buy a Tesla today, these robo-taxis are like $20,000 cheaper than the ones that you would buy. And so, and I guess his ability to get the principal back on the car might cost him $30,000, $35,000 to make. He gets that completely back within 2 years of letting it just run. Okay. So he has no incentive to sell a car to somebody that's going to sit on the car for 5 years. And then he makes, $3,000 to $5,000 on the car every 5 years, when he can get the complete principal back. And then it's just all gravy for the next 3 to 5 years by running the robo taxi. And the cost is like way cheaper than a person, owning their own car. So like, I can just call that thing on my smartphone. It picks me up. I don't have to ever worry about maintenance. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And it costs me $4 to go to how are you going to compete in that? So the tech deflation is going to cause, in my opinion, massive amounts of fiat inflation as the governments try to offset all these job losses, right? Yeah. The thing that people are failing to think, I literally just read, and sorry to go on and on here, but I think this is something that is just so misunderstood as people are looking at this inflation versus deflation thing. So Amazon, literally just saw this article today. Amazon is trying to replace 75% of their workforce. 1.5 million people work in their labor in Amazon today. So they're trying to replace 75% of those people within, I think the timeline was by 2033. They're trying to replace 75% of them with like humanoid robots and stuff. Okay. So what are those people going to do?
Exactly.
Is for work? Well, the government's going to have to subsidize that. The government is going to have to print, and this isn't me promoting UBI. I'm just telling you politically, this is going to become extremely popular for people to have some type of subsidy from the government. Well, how's the government going to do that? They're just going to print. How's the government going to offset the commercial real estate stuff we were talking about? Well, they're going to do these facilities that you can basically put the ownership on the certificate of ownership on deposit at the bank and they'll list it at par. Things like that which is a form of printing. So the mechanics for them to deal with all this dislocation is why the fiat is going to be very inflationary. But as far as prices go to go do these things, they're going to be extremely deflationary as the intelligence and all this stuff kind of kicks into high gear.
This is Jeff's overarching point, that you can't have a debt-based credit system, which by its very nature is like a shark. It has to grow and expand.
Yes.
In an economy where we're getting increasingly more efficient, and it's increasingly deflationary. And I would add to your point about Preston's points about how much things are going down on Amazon. I just did a deep dive on some of the manufacturing going on in China. You know, China is manufacturing electric cars that are better than ours, better than Tesla, and the cost is about half as much. And they're using as much as 70% robotics on the assembly line. I mean, this is just really going to disrupt, our standard, manufacturing jobs to the degree we even have any left. And I think on the political side, Natalie, as you point out, I mean, this is why a Mamdani in New York is so popular because, I've got kids down there who, raised in a capitalist Bitcoiner family are actually pretty sympathetic to what the message the guy's saying. And, dad has to spend time convincing them that he's all full of shit, that his solution is wrong. But his messaging is good. I mean, he's right. I mean, people are getting screwed. I mean, we all know that.
Effective. I think effective is a better word.
Yeah, not good. You're right. You're right, Preston. It's effective in terms of what he's trying. Well, he's probably going to win, right? And that will lead to UBI, et cetera. I mean, I'll let you guys in on kind of my peak view of the next 6 or 7 years. Because conferences, people have recently asked it. Here's how I think this goes down. I think we have a lot more inflation for the next few years, and then I think, sadly, in 2020,
in the money supply
and in prices. And then I think as a result of that, sadly, in 2028, blue team wins because they come in and they promise that the bottom half is hurting and the bottom half votes out the upper half. And basically, Andrew Yang is VP and we get UBI and Stephanie Kelton as Treasury Secretary. And that's the last nail in the fiat coffin. And so from there, we go into very high inflation bordering on hyperinflation. And then I think in 2032, Michael Saylor's the richest man in the world, and he runs for president and wins and brings an engineering solution to the problem, and we're out of this fourth turning. That's kind of my view on how this unfolds.
Larry, I would push back on I would just kind of define this inflation thing a little bit more. Okay. So if it's something that is very scarce and desirable and very difficult to replicate or to, like, for example, beef, yes. Right? It's kind of it's a tricky thing to really kind of expand.
You can't automate it.
Yeah, I mean, you can automate some things, but not really. Like, it's going to be a lot harder to do it. So, will you see the price of something like that really kind of go up in fiat terms? Hell yeah, you will. Oh, yeah. I think you're going to continue to see it rip. But then on things like what we just discussed with like the Uber situation, riding around in your car. And how automated some of that's going to become, I think the prices could go in a direction that are actually quite surprising lower.
I agree.
And so I think the critical thing as you're thinking through, is it going to be really expensive or is it going to be really cheap? If AI and humanoid robotics can step in and augment a profession or an industry pretty drastically, you might not actually see the prices in fiat terms explode up. But if it's something that, the example that Michael always uses is a house in the Hamptons, well, you can't create another Hamptons. Like, there's only one Hamptons or whatever, right? When you think through it of the scarcity of the desirable thing as it exists on the planet, if you can't replicate that, the prices in fiat terms are just going to blow people's minds. I think like absolutely blow people's minds. Yeah. But if it is something that you can replicate, the prices might actually be like really deflationary. And I think that dynamic's going to be really strange for people as they're going through a lot of this, because all this printing, people, as soon as they get it in their hot hands, the first thing they're going to do is try to go out and get the thing that they just can't, that is scarce and desirable. Right. That's the thing they want to go get, is whatever's scarce and desirable. That's what they're going to try to get with their newly issued coupons that everybody's receiving.
I just find all of this fascinating, because when I watch interviews with younger voters, they all really demonize capitalism and they blame it for all of the problems that they're facing. And they resent the corporations, the executives. And I understand what it's like to want to tax the rich, because I really, really resonated with that movement after the great financial crisis. I was like a total Bernie supporter, and I felt like there was just such an injustice at the core of the system, and that some force, which I guess thought should be the government, needed to go in there and equalize things and redistribute the wealth and share it with the working class that's working so hard but feeling disenfranchised. And it wasn't until I went down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin and started studying different economic theories and really took the time to learn what capitalism actually is, that it completely changed my worldview. And I realized I was blaming a lot of the symptoms on the wrong thing.
Natalie, your point is, we haven't had capitalism.
Well, that's right.
We think we've had capitalism.
This is
right.
crony capitalism that benefits a certain set of people. Right?
Well, for people listening who might resonate with some of these promises being made, not just, we're seeing it obviously in New York City, but I think we're going to see it in many, many places. It's going to be maybe the platform of one of the major political parties. Sure. So like, what do people have wrong? Why should they not look at capitalism as something that inherently just creates all of this wealth inequality due to greed?
So that's obviously it's an advertisement for my book and for your book as well. But this isn't really capitalism, as Preston has pointed out. This is not really capitalism, and the reason it's unjust and unfair is that the system is stacked in favor of the people who are sitting at the top and are controlling the monetary strings. And in a fair monetary system, the wealth would not be so tilted to the top, and so. Capitalism in and of itself is not flawed. It created the greatest country in the world in 1946, and it has brought a standard of living to the world that had never been known before, and will never be, will continue to increase forever if we allow it to flourish. But we don't have capitalism. We have crony capitalism, and that's I think that's the core of the problem. And you can't solve it through taxation. The taxation is just money the government grabs to waste on stupid shit. You can only solve it through greater efficiency. And the only way you can get greater efficiency is to have engineers running the place and to basically be pricing money correctly so that the right things get financed and produced. If we had, instead of building all those tanks that Preston alludes to and pissing away $8 trillion in the Middle East, if we had been building nuclear reactors like China has done, our average kilowatt hour price is, 14 cents an hour across the United States. China average kilowatt per hour price for electricity is 5 cents. So why did the Chinese pay 1/3 of what we pay for electricity? Well, it's because, admittedly in a communist system that was state directed, but at least the people at the top were smart enough to realize that rather than go get in a bunch of wars, let's actually make ourselves more efficient. And that's really, we've got too many lawyers and not enough engineers. If we want to have better living standards, we need more engineers, and we need to make things better, cheaper, faster. And the only way to do that is to allocate capital properly. And when you have a fiat system where I posted a chart this morning on my Twitter feed, we're zooming back and forth between high rates, low rates, high rates, low rates, zero interest, 20% interest. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And that's the core of the problem. But I get why people would look at it and say, oh, these billionaires are taking advantage of me. And to be fair, some of those billionaires are only billionaires because of this broken system. They don't deserve the wealth they have. Some of them created real value. I don't dispute that, but some of them are just really money changers who figured out a way to game the system. The private equity guys, the leveraged buyout guys, they're rich as Croesus because they can borrow from the Fed and the government at very low rates and put it into a carry trade. And that's the problem. And taxation doesn't solve it. What solves it is draining the monetary swamp and getting rid of the Fed.
Well, and you're putting a spotlight on the outcome of this post 1971 structure of
Right.
the global financial system, with the dollar at the core as the reserve asset, which we can just print, right? And we've financialized the economy. We've made
Right.
Wall Street very, very wealthy, and anyone connected to political access very, very wealthy, happy, all of that. But now things seem to be changing. China has a lot more leverage on us than I think anyone on Wall Street wants to admit.
Yes.
I think this is what Luke Gromen does such a great job explaining in some of his recent newsletters, especially when it comes to the rare earth elements, which are now being weaponized. And I think we're getting some sort of a trade deal now with China where we're going to allow them to have chips. They're going to allow us to have some of these rare earths. And no one is admitting that it just takes so long in terms of creating the infrastructure to become competitive again, after we've spent decades just hollowing ourselves out and essentially selling ourselves to these other countries, right, in exchange for paper promises. And I would love to get your thoughts on these geopolitical shifts that are happening, because when you zoom out, we're clearly moving away from the dollar as the reserve asset, but we're not moving to Bitcoin. We're moving right now, it seems, to gold. So what do you think is happening geopolitically, and how can this eventually benefit Bitcoin?
I would just say that people in the United States are finally starting to figure out that meat doesn't come from the grocery store and gas doesn't come from the gas station.
Water doesn't come from the faucet. That's what Luke wrote. Yeah.
From the faucet. And Luke was, saying, I love this framing, because at the core, what you're getting at is first principle thinking of like, where do these things come from? If it's refined, where's the refinery? Is it here in the United States or is it overseas? And like, when you go to the root of where these tangible, desirable things come from, you quickly learn your dependencies on getting the desirable things. Because for, under the petrodollar system, we had a huge tailwind of just living in the lap of luxury, because the paper that was achieving this network effect around the world allowed us to rest on our laurels and to think that it was our skill that got us to where we're at, as opposed to the environmental setup.
Right.
Okay. And for a lot of people, they're learning the hard lesson that it was actually the environmental setup that, resulted in their success, as opposed to their skill.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like I've been saying this for what feels like a decade, is that if you're a net producer as a country, like, they're going to be able to weather this a lot easier than the net consumers. And when you look at all the advanced economies around the world, they're mostly net consumers. And they're finding out very quickly, like, why it's important to like actually have the mine in your domain and in your region, as opposed to be reliant and have a dependency on somebody else to provide you a rare earth metal for your F-22 fighter. That thing's only as good as the logistics supply chain that fixes the parts and pieces of all these complex end items to keep it in the air. It's that simple. And like, that's just one tiny thing in this very grand, complex system we call our economy. So as that petrodollar system starts to unwind itself, which I would argue the unwind, or the start of that unwind, was COVID. And we're trending in this direction. And you finally have some people starting to understand, like, the importance of bringing this stuff domestically back inside the US. Will the humanoid robots help in that process? I think that it's pretty much our only hope, because I think the capacity of the humans in this particular country to go back and start doing some of these jobs that existed, decades and decades ago is not there.
Yeah, we don't have the skilled labor for all the infrastructure projects, and we don't have the welders, we don't have the electricians. Yeah.
You don't have the mental health to go back and perform that type of work in this country. And so, that's hope. But, it also it just plays on this theme of displacement, just there's going to be a ton of displacement. But people just need to be prepared. I mean, you got a massive shift that's happening here, decades and decades of things that are going to reshore themselves. But I suspect it's going to be rooted in a whole lot of advanced technologies that allow it to come back and get here. And in the meantime, the incentives for violence are pretty interesting. How maybe you can't even act on it because you don't even have the capacity from a logistics standpoint to act on it. And hopefully, we have people in the seats that understand their complete impotence when it comes to acting on some of their desires for violence. Because I would suggest they're completely incapable of acting on anything that involves that. They might last, 15 to 30 days, but after that, they're going to find out that the real pros when it comes to military defense action study logistics and not necessarily their tactics.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the most positive things, I think the point Luke Gromen has made is very interesting, is that basically China has stripped our ability to actually conduct a war. And unless China becomes very warlike, and I honestly don't think they are, it's rather ironic, but that might be a good thing.